We call them the Great Lakes. The name itself is a comfort, a simple geographic label that implies safety, boundaries, and human control. They are the heartland of American industry, an iron highway of commerce. We see them as vast, yes, but ultimately as ours, tamed, understood. But this name, this comfortable, modern label, is a mask. It is an illusion. The Anishinaabe, the first peoples who lived on these shores for millennia, had other names. They called this water Gichigami, the Great Sea. They knew this was not a lake. It was a living entity, a sleeping giant, a place of profound power, with its own moods, its own memory, and its own gods, terrifying spirits of the deep, like the great underwater panther, Mishipeshu. This was the 0-point lore, the knowledge that these waters were not a highway, they were a graveyard. In our modern arrogance, we forgot this lore. We built our monuments of steel, our unsinkable freighters, and we sent them out onto the dragon's back, armed with the thin, fragile science of barometers and telegraphs. We believed we were the masters of this world. Then, in November of 1913, Gishigami woke up. The 1913 storm was not an accident. It was a mechanism. For 4 days, a storm descended on the Great Lakes that, by all rights, should not exist. It was not born in the warm, churning nursery of the tropical Atlantic. It was born in the cold heart of the continent. And yet, it attacked with the fury of a Category 1 hurricane. It unleashed winds that gusted to 90 miles per hour and waves that towered 35 feet high. Waves on a lake. When the storm finally passed, it left behind a shattered landscape, 250 souls lost, and a mystery that, to this day, defies our understanding of nature. The official story, the one in the textbooks, calls it a freak event, a perfect storm, a tragic, 1 in a million anomaly. This is the comfortable story, and it is dangerously incomplete. The event of 1913 was not an accident. It was a mechanism. It was not a storm that simply hit the lakes. It was a storm that was built by the lakes, a weapon forged by the water itself to defend its ancient territory. This is the lost blueprint of a cyclical, freshwater apocalypse. To understand the mechanism, you must first understand the motive. And the motive was greed. November, the witch month on the Great Lakes. The shipping season was closing. Cargo companies were desperate, rushing to fulfill their last profitable orders before the long winter ice set in. Their faith was not in the sky, it was in steel. The new, long, steel freighters were monuments of industrial power, some over 500 feet long. They were considered unsinkable. They believed they could out-muscle any freshwater storm. Their only guide was the U.S. Weather Bureau, an agency still in its infancy, using hand-drawn maps and a system of flags and lanterns to communicate forecasts. By the time their warnings were raised, the mechanism was already in motion. On November 6th, the pieces assembled. We call them weather systems. But on this day, they were components of a weapon. First, the anvil, a mass of cold, dry Arctic air sweeping south from Canada. Second, the hammer, a wave of warm, intensely moist air churning north from the Gulf of Mexico. These two forces were on a collision course. But this was normal. This happens a dozen times a year. A typical collision would create a strong, fast-moving storm, one that would rain itself out over the continent and be gone in a day. But in 1913, it did not just pass over. It descended. It descended upon the forge, the Great Lakes themselves. You see, The lakes, due to their immense volume, act like thermal batteries. They hold the memory of summer's heat, long into the cold of autumn. The lake water in November was still relatively warm. The Arctic air of the anvil was freezing. When that cold, dry air hit the warm, moist surface of the lakes, the effect was not meteorological. It was alchemical. The lakes began to breathe fire. They pumped billions of gallons of water vapor and thermal energy into the colliding storms above them. The storm system stopped moving east. It stalled. Anchored in place by this endless, vertical torrent of fuel, it began to feed. It began to spin. This is the birth of the lake effect. But this was not the lake effect we know. This was not just snow. This was cyclogenesis, the birth of a cyclone. The lakes had not just fueled the storm, they had hijacked it. They had re-engineered it from a simple blizzard into a spinning, freshwater hurricane. A white hurricane. This is the fracture point in the official story. The captains of 1913 believed they were fighting a known enemy, a November gale. They were wrong. They were trapped in the gears of a machine designed by the planet itself to do one thing: transfer the thermal energy of an inland ocean into the atmosphere. And the byproduct of this machine was chaos. On November 7th, Captain John Doodleson of the steamer LC Waldo left port in Minnesota. The weather was calm, the temperatures mild. The Weather Bureau, blissfully unaware of the forge they were floating on, had only predicted moderate to brisk winds. It was the last normal day on Earth for the crews of the Great Lakes. By 10 a.m., the first warnings were raised. Storm flags, 5 mile-per-hour winds. By nightfall, Lake Superior was in a state of primal fury. Sustained winds of 60 miles per hour, gusts hitting 80. That is hurricane force. Aboard the Waldo, the world ended. The waves rose to 35 feet. We must pause here. You must understand what a 35-foot wave is on a lake. In an ocean, waves are rollers. They are spaced far apart. A large ship can ride up one and down the next. On a lake, the waves are fetch limited. They are packed together. They are not rollers. They are pyramids. Vertical, chaotic, and vicious. A ship doesn't ride them. It is struck by them. The Waldo was struck. A rogue wave, a wall of black water, smashed into the side of the ship. It didn't just splash. It obliterated the pilot house. It ripped steel, shattered glass, and exposed the command crew to the 30-degree, below-zero winds. The navigational equipment was gone. They were blind. And then, the precipitation began. It was not just snow. It was a horizontal blast of ice and slush. The temperature plummeted. The spray froze instantly where it hit. The ship was being mummified in ice, tons of it, making it top-heavy, unstable, and doomed. The storm was not just trying to sink the Waldo. It was trying to capsize it. The crew was fighting for their lives. The captain, steering by a spare compass grabbed from a lifeboat, was desperate to find shelter. And then, the final, mechanical failure. The Waldo was no longer a ship. It was a 470-foot steel coffin, helpless, unsteerable, and being driven by a hurricane, directly toward a needle of rock called Gull Rock. We will leave the Waldo there, balanced on the knife edge of oblivion, because while its crew fought for inches, the mechanism of the storm was about to achieve its terrible masterpiece, 400 miles away. While Lake Superior was a battleground, Lake Huron became a void. On November 9th, the two storms finally merged into one extratropical cyclone. The barometric pressure plunged. The winds changed. They stopped blowing from one direction. They began to spin. The captains on Lake Huron were now trapped in a blender. Winds gusting to 90 miles per hour slammed them. first from the northeast, then the south, then the northwest, and the snow. The white hurricane began. It was not a snowfall. It was a whiteout, a total, suffocating blindness. Captains reported they could not see the bow of their own ship from the pilot house. They were blind, deafened by the roar, and being struck by 35-foot pyramidal waves. Their technology, their steel, their engines, their compasses was rendered meaningless. This is the emotional trigger point, the 0 point of the white hurricane, the 6-hour apocalypse. In just 6 hours, on Lake Huron alone, 8 of the largest, newest, and most advanced freighters on the lakes were erased. Not just sunk, erased. The James Carruthers vanished. The Argus vanished. The John A. McGean vanished. The mystery was immortalized by the Charles S. Price. Days later, it was found floating, upside down, turned turtle, a 500-foot monument of steel, floating in the water like a dead whale. It was so coated in ice that its name was unreadable. For days, it was known only as the mystery ship. This is the core question. The why. How? How does a 500-foot steel ship, designed to carry 10,000 tons of iron ore, get flipped upside down? In a lake, the mechanism was as brilliant as it was terrifying. First, the ice. Tons of it, clinging to the superstructure, making the ships impossibly top-heavy. Second, the cargo. In the violent, chaotic waves, the cargo of ore or coal could shift. Third, the waves. A 35-foot rogue wave strikes the ship, already unstable. At just the wrong angle, the ship rolls. It reaches a point of no return. The shifted cargo and the ice do the rest. It turns turtle. For the men inside, it was the most horrific death imaginable. Trapped in a steel drum, upside down, in freezing black water, with no hope of escape. This is the lore of 1913. It is not a story of bad luck. It is a story of a system so perfect in its lethality that it selected the biggest and strongest and annihilated them. It proved that our unsinkable technology was a fragile, arrogant joke. It is a blueprint for an apocalypse. And while this 6-hour void was opening on Lake Huron, one ship, 400 miles away, was rewriting the rules of survival. The Waldo had struck Gull Rock. The unsteerable ship was now impaled on a spike of granite. And here, Captain Duddleson made a choice that defies all maritime logic. He knew the waves would eventually smash the ship to pieces or toss it back into the killing field of the lake. So, he made a choice. He decided to kill his ship to save his crew. He ordered the engines run at full power, driving the ship harder onto the rock. Then, he gave a second, even stranger order. Flood the forward compartments. He would make the bow so heavy, so full of water, that the storm could not move it. He was using the lake's own weapon, water, against it. It was an act of pure, desperate genius. The crew, including the captain's wife and her mother, huddled in the bow, listening as the storm performed its final execution. A crack formed. The hull screamed. And then, with a sound like a dying god, the entire stern of the Waldo, the back half of the ship, tore off and plunged into the abyss. They were now powerless. No heat, no food, 24 souls, trapped in a broken piece of steel, in the middle of a freshwater hurricane. With temperatures at 30 below, they were alive. But the mechanism of the storm was now trying to freeze them. This is the moment of human ingenuity. This is our lost technology. An engineer, in the freezing dark, had an idea. He and the crew clawed their way to the captain's quarters, and they detached the bathtub. They carried it back. They flipped it upside down, They kicked the bottoms out of fire buckets and, piece by piece, built a chimney leading to a porthole. They tore apart the ship's wooden interior, and they built a fire. They had built a bathtub stove for 60 agonizing hours as the white hurricane raged. These 24 people and the ship's dog huddled around this single, impossible point of warmth. They survived, but they were in a tomb, and the ice was sealing it. When the storm finally broke, the rescuers found them. They had to be freed with axes. The rescuers themselves were testament to a different kind of human lore. The lore of the Great Lakes Life-Saving Service. Their motto was not a suggestion. It was a law. You have to go out. You don't have to come back. The crews who tried to save the Waldo had to be chopped free from their own boats with axes, their clothes and bodies frozen solid to their seats. This is the human spirit, a force as strong as the storm itself. The Waldo crew was the only crew of a major, destroyed freighter to survive. All of them. They had faced the mechanism. And, through ingenuity and heretical thinking, they had won. The storm passed. The white hurricane moved on, leaving behind a new, modern map of grief. 12 ships, including 8 of the Unsinkables, were at the bottom of the lakes. 19 others were stranded. 250 people were dead. The cost, in today's money, was over $149 million. For decades, the stories told by the survivors, the 35-foot waves, the hurricane winds, were dismissed as sailors' yarns, the trauma of men exaggerating their ordeal. The official story could not accept a hurricane on a lake until 2013, the 100-year anniversary. Meteorologists, armed with supercomputers, fed the original, primitive data from 1913 into their most advanced models. The myth was confirmed. The simulation produced wind gusts over 80 miles per hour and waves higher than 36 feet. The sailors hadn't been lying. They had been understating the horror. The science finally proved that the lore was real. The white hurricane was not a freak storm. It was a cycle. It was a blueprint. It was a demonstration of a kill mechanism that is built into the physics of our planet. And we are a civilization with amnesia. We have forgotten the lore. We still build our cities on the shores. We still send our ships onto the water. We still look at Gichigami, and we see only a lake. We have forgotten that the comfortable story is the most dangerous myth of all. The storm of 1913 was not just history. It was a warning that the Earth's ancient systems are not our servants. They are not our highways. They are sleeping giants. And we, in our fragile steel world, are living by their permission. The mechanism is still there. The forge is still warm. The anvil and the hammer still wait in the sky. And the lore, written in the graves of 250 souls, is waiting to be read. If you believe that our planet is still full of profound, unsolved mysteries, that the myths of our ancestors are fragmented memories, then subscribe to 0 Point Lore. We are building a community dedicated to reading the blueprints that history has left behind. We want to know what you think. What part of this lost event haunts you the most? The terrifying 6-hour void on Lake Huron that erased 187 lives? Or the impossible story of survival? The bathtub stove that saved the crew of the Waldo? Let us know your theory in the comments below. The white hurricane was not an anomaly. It was a cycle, waiting to repeat. It is the definitive, terrifying proof that the most dangerous, untamed, and alien worlds, they are right here, on the map of our own world, hiding behind a comfortable name.
Hiding behind a comfortable name.